Also ein herzliches Willkommen an alle Teilnehmer aus Österreich and welcome to all the participants or to our speakers in Canada. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie beim Webinar Nummer 2 aus unserer Webinarreihe Lebensmittel und Getränke erfolgreich nach Kanada exportieren dabei sind. Mein Name ist Christiane Böck. Ich bin Mitarbeiterin am Außenwirtschaftscenter in Toronto. Einige von Ihnen kennen mich vielleicht über die SIAL, die ja jedes Jahr in Kanada stattfindet. Ich darf Sie heute durch das Webinar führen. Unser Webinar wird heute eine Panel-Discussion sein, also keine klassische Präsentation, und ich werde auch in Kürze unsere Sprecher vorbereiten. Zuallererst möchte ich Ihnen aber noch einmal das Thema näher bringen. Also es geht heute um Distributionskanäle, Importeure und Eigenmarken. Wir haben auch einige Housekeeping-Dinge zu beachten. Es wird das heutige Webinar wieder aufgenommen. Die Vortragsunterlagen erhalten Sie im Anschluss an das Webinar. Wir würden Sie, wie gesagt, bitten, Ihre Kameras während des Webinars abgedreht zu haben und auch Ihr Audio natürlich abzudrehen. Sollten Sie Fragen haben, und wir würden uns wirklich über sehr, sehr viele, zahlreiche Fragen aus Österreich freuen, können Sie diese gerne in den Chat schreiben und wir werden sie dann im Q&A oder vielleicht auch im Zuge der Diskussion beantworten. Sollte irgendeine Frage unbeantwortet bleiben, werden wir uns im Anschluss an das Webinar an Sie wenden. Hier noch einmal ganz kurz ein Überblick, was uns heute erwartet. Nach meiner kurzen Einleitung und Vorstellung der Sprecher geht es auch gleich in eine Panel-Discussion und dann, wie gesagt, das Q&A, wobei, wie gesagt, wir sind flexibel und können das auch in die Panel-Discussion einbauen. Aber jetzt einmal zu unseren heutigen Sprechern. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir Perrine Hassanali mit dabei haben. Sie hat sich aus Vancouver zugeschaltet und wie Sie aus unserem vergangenen Webinar wissen, ist ja Kanada sehr, sehr groß. Perrine hat 9 Stunden Zeitunterschied zu Österreich, nicht nur 6 Stunden wie wir in Toronto. Und she got up bright and early to join today's webinar. So, Perrine ist Gründerin und Geschäftsführerin von Salute Brand Management Inc. und eine Expertin im Bereich Food Marketing. Ihr Fokus liegt auf natürlichen und Bio-Lebensmitteln, ist seit vielen Jahren in der Branche als Beraterin tätig und sie berät wirklich Firmen, die nach Kanada kommen wollen und ihre CPG, also ihre Marken in Kanada, Consumer Packaged Goods in Kanada verkaufen wollen, von Fragen der Herstellung über Marketing, Import, Export, Regulatorien bis hin zum Vertrieb. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass sie heute mit dabei ist. Unser weiterer Experte, Peter Skoppel, ist einigen von Ihnen vielleicht sogar schon bestens bekannt. Peter war einige Male in Wien beim Marketplace. Peter, you have joined Marketplace multiple times and you may know some of today's participants. Peter ist der Eigentümer von Alliance Import and Export und ein Spezialist, was Import und Export von wirklich hochwertigen Konsumgütern aus aller Welt angeht. Er hat selbst über 20 Jahre Erfahrung im Vertrieb und hat vor einigen wenigen Jahren Alliance Import und Export, auch ein renommiertes Unternehmen, gekauft und ist jetzt quasi der Eigentümer. Er kann Marken sowohl vertreten am kanadischen und am US-amerikanischen Markt oder eben auch Marken zu Private Labeling Opportunities verhelfen. Er arbeitet auch aktuell mit einigen Österreichern. Er wird sicherlich dann später auch von seiner Erfahrung berichten können in der Zusammenarbeit. Unsere dritte Expertin, Sabrina McManus, ist eine Senior Executive mit über 20 Jahren Erfahrung ebenso. Sie hat bei Loblaws Companies Produktinnovationen vorangetrieben und vor allem und insbesondere an der Eigenmarke President's Choice gearbeitet, aber auch Initiativen wie No Name, Simple Check oder Plant-Based, BC Plant-Based Initiativen. Für all jene, die beim Webinar Nummer 1 dabei waren, wo es um den Marktüberblick, Konsumverhalten und Trends gegangen ist, sowohl Joanne MacArthur als auch Sylvain Charlebois haben mehrere Male die PC-Eigenmarke oder PC-Brand erwähnt, die wirklich eine ikonische Marke in Kanada ist, eine sehr, sehr starke Marke. Also wir werden später noch mehr von Sabrina diesbezüglich erfahren. Ich möchte Ihnen in Erinnerung rufen, die Folie, die Joanne MacArthur im Webinar Nummer 1 präsentiert hat. Sie hat über die Retail Landscape gesprochen hat damals auch, also beide, sowohl Sylvain als auch Joanne, haben quasi die Marktaufteilung präsentiert, also die Big Five und dann natürlich auch dieses Tortendiagramm, das diesen Rest darstellt, etwas näher sich angesehen, wobei wir da heute auch nochmal mehr ins Detail gehen werden. Die folgende Folie hat uns dann noch freundlicherweise Perrine zur Verfügung gestellt, die noch einmal ein bisschen mehr im Detail zeigt, was dieser Independent und Specialty oder Ethnic Market alles in sich birgt. I'm going to switch now to English as we start our panel discussion. And I would like to ask Perrine and Peter and Sabrina. And I would like you to turn on your cameras. To all the participants, feel free to post your questions in the chat. Perrine, I would like to start off with you. So based on your experience in working with independent and specialty and ethnic market segments with your focus on, natural and organic food, what are the advantages in engaging in these sectors, and what unique benefits do these markets offer for businesses who may be new to the market? Do you want to start with this question, and then you can always, give the floor to the other speakers, involve them in the presentation, in the discussion.
Thank you, Christiane. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to learn a little bit more about Canada and our beautiful country and the products we can offer. So we're very excited to work with you, talk to you about Austrian companies and Austrian products coming into Canada. As Christiane mentioned, I mainly work with the independent markets in Canada, which are approximately 24% of the market share of grocery in Canada. So independent markets are a little more unique and easier to do business with, simply because they're smaller. They're very often locally run or owner run. So decision making is easier. You can go up to a locally owned market, talk to them about your products, engage with them, get them listed possibly, and get your products on shelf. They're easier to work with. They make faster decisions, definitely, than the bigger ones. And you also have an opportunity to test and learn. So when you're new in the country, very often it's always better to walk before you run. And the independent markets often give you that platform to do that, where they take a personal interest in you, you build a relationship, you talk to them, you find out what works, what doesn't. Sometimes they can even help you place their products in a little more strategically. So there's a lot more flexibility. However, independent markets do have some restrictions in the form of they do not offer the volumes that the big box companies offer. So when you're importing or exporting into Canada, you need to have a big shipment come through. Independent markets often cannot take that whole lot. So at this point, I'm going to transfer it over to Sabrina, my good friend, and she can talk to you a little bit about the bigger companies, the bigger mass grocery markets. Sabrina?
Thanks, Perrine. So just to build a little bit on what Perrine is saying, that ethnic market and that independent market shouldn't and couldn't be ignored in Canada. They are really the foundation of trends and of where source of volume will come from in the future. And big box retailers tend to look at what these independent retailers and what these ethnic retailers are doing in order for them to be guided into what categories, what products, what areas to get into next. And I would add that Loblaws is even testing a little bit of this concept within their own stores. So if any of you have had a chance to come and see some of the Loblaws stores, most of them you'll notice have what they call an ethnic aisle. And it's really this one aisle of the store where they will test a lot of these lower volume, nichier type products that speak to a specific demographic or a specific customer. And once they see the traction or the volume, they'll pull it out and bring it into the mainline set. Natural value is another example within Loblaw companies of a store within a store. So they take this independent model that Perrine was talking about, and they'll test concepts or they'll test velocity. We call it a little bit of an incubator within the store to really make sure that the customer feels that they have a place to go to get the product. And once the volume has gotten to a place of earning its spot on shelf in the main aisle, they'll then move it out. I would say within Loblaw companies, Fortino's as a banner does a really good job at living this independent world. They are franchise owned and operated. So again, to just build on what Preen was saying, there is this relationship with a store owner. You can really test your volume in smaller places that aren't as costly as dealing with the Loblaw buyer if you wanted to go into the ethnic aisle, because unfortunately or fortunately, when you work with Loblaw, you are, and we'll get into it in a little bit, you are dealing with the larger fees associated with the big box retailer. One fact that I'll just leave you with, because as I was reading and prepping for this session today, it reminded me there's a stat that's going around that Canada's population by 2030, 30%, so it's 30 and 30% will be from outside of the country. So that's how ethnically diverse we are as a country and as a population. So it's just something to consider as you think about products that would fit within this marketplace and where to put them. Peter, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to sum that up, like independent retailers can adapt quickly to change in consumer preference. That's why I like really working with them, and they're swift to changes with you and work with you. And also it encourages smaller markets, experimentation and innovation. And they're great to test new things with you, and you can refine it, which is great. And at the end of the day, it just builds a stronger relationship and can lead into loyalty and repeat business, in my opinion.
So, Sabrina, you mentioned a very important word. You spoke about the diversity of Canada. That is really something very, very special. There is something else, like we have heard in the first webinar a little bit about it, the regionality of Canada and the vast land that is to work with. So I don't know who would like to take the question, but how does this regionality of Canada impact the distribution and marketing strategy of food and beverage consumer packaged goods? So Perrine, maybe would you like to talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So as you're all aware, Canada is very vast. And what's important is that we have pockets across the country where Toronto, Quebec, Vancouver are more urban and densely populated. And then Alberta and the Midwest are a little more sparse. So the ethnic communities tend to gravitate towards the urban areas, and the independents also form clusters in those areas to support these communities that are living there. So the urban areas will then start catering to the niche products, the independent products, the ethnic products. And the rural areas start supporting the basics, the fundamentals of food and grocery. So it's important to also understand for Austrian companies the port of entry, where they're going to be shipping their products into, because again, like we said, Canada is vast, and to travel product from east to west or west to east takes 7 to 10 days. So please factor that in and research where your products are better suited and where you have storage costs that can be reduced or managed, or you have an opportunity to work with. And then limit the transportation across east and west simply because it is expensive and time consuming. I'd like Sabrina or Peter to add to that if you like.
Yeah, I mean, you're being on it. And the only thing I would say from a Loblaw perspective or a big box perspective is they will always want you to go direct because their volume warrants it and their costing demands it. So along with understanding your port of entry, you're going to want to get detailed information as you think about coming into Canada, about where the specific distribution centers are for each of the major retailers. So the Walmarts and the Loblaws of the world. Loblaws is starting to shift a lot of their delivery schedules to this, what we call flow model, or this cross-dock model, where they want increasingly they want this flexibility of being able to order on demand for daily deliveries. Because then what they do is they send trucks out to each of their stores. And depending on where those stores are, those, thinking about your product, in its optimal state. And like Europe, where you guys can get daily deliveries, there are some parts within Canada that are only getting weekly deliveries to fill their shelves. And so what does that mean for shelf life of your product and optimal eating of your product? So just some considerations as you think about the type of product that you're looking to sell into Canada. Now, there's nothing to suggest that you can't target a specific dense market like Toronto or like Vancouver or like Montreal. But typically when you're dealing with a Loblaw or a Walmart, they're going to want you to ship to all their DCs across the country, and the product needs to go into all their stores. So a regional strategy is probably more suited for your independent market, if that helps. Peter, anything else to add there?
Yes, if I might add, I'm managing a brand right now from Europe, and we had to go to regional distributors after we signed up major distributors in the major cities, simply for the fact that those current distributors are not strong in regional areas, like, for example, Quebec, and in Victoria, and et cetera, et cetera. So we had to put on some new distributors that are regional and they're experienced in that area, and also it helps with the shipping, because most of those current distributors you have to pay a premium to ship to the smaller cities or East Canada. So it worked out well. So that's a very critical point.
So another question that I would like to ask you is, how can Austrian food and beverage brands tailor their products and branding to align with the preferences of Canadian consumers? And maybe you can answer these questions from your own perspective and experience. I think it's one thing to bring the products to Canada, but how do you stay on the shelves, right?
Yes, for sure. I mean, products, it's easy to get on shelf, but it's harder to get off shelf. And that's when, you need to work with either in the independent markets. Again, it's a lot easier because you have these relationships, or you're actively building these relationships either through your broker or your distributor or your sales agent. And you can talk to them and strategize with them as to where placement of your product is good, whether you are addressing festivals, or you're addressing events, or you're addressing, just basic shelving on shelf, right? If you've got the products on shelf, but you've also got a dual placement, there are multiple ways you can do that. Marketing and branding is always exciting. So research is a very, very important part before you land into Canada, is learn what the Canadians are looking for. Sometimes the key call outs on your packaging, it may be very normal for, Austrian companies to have products that are sweetened with beets. But I had an experience with an Austrian company where they put beet juice in there as a sweetener. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. We put sugar here and we don't like sugar. So it's a natural thing, but they didn't call it out. So do those researches. Make sure that you're addressing what Canadian consumers are looking for. And it may be normal in your country, but it's not normal in ours. So if you do a little bit of market research on that and address those call outs on your packaging, or even in your literature, if you can't change your packaging on your products, then have shelf talkers, little bobblers, as we call them, that call out your product's key features. And those things kind of build that connection with the consumer that is looking to form that, relationship with your product. And that's very important to engage with, to get loyalty for your brand. A lot easier to do that in independents than in the bigger ones. But Sabrina.
Yeah, I mean, and so I'll speak to it from a private label point of view at Loblaw specifically. So they do a lot of research in terms of consumer trends and they use a lot of consumer insights. They have a very, very strong loyalty program that feeds them with tons of consumer data that's very specific to the Canadian consumers. So getting your hands on that is not always easy, but I can tell you, having worked there, how robust it is. And so, you know, again, to Perrine's point, like, market research is critical. I would say a couple things. One, we tend to follow a lot of what, from a trend perspective, we see in Europe. And so think of, you know, those classic European English private label brands like Marks and Spencer's. You know, we'll take a look and see what's happening in that space to see if there's any trends coming through. We'll go to PLMA in Amsterdam and see what the big trends are that are emerging there. I think Pinsa was one of them a couple of years ago. And so you'll start to see things like that pop up. Definitely a follow Europe type of perspective. I would say keep up to date with regulatory if you can, you know, whether it's your own regulatory team doing research on Canadian regulatory, or you have somebody here that you can lean on. They change, not often, but every 3 to 5 years, there's some major change in food regulation, and it tends to go with, you know, changing of the government. So whenever we have a new prime minister, you'll start to see new legislation on packaging. And the most recent one that's coming up right now is front of pack labeling. So these big claims on the pack that are quite invasive, to be honest with you, but, you know, even private labels not immune from them, that are designed to lead the consumer in an educated way on things that are high in sugar, things that are high in fat, things that are high in salt. So they really are calling out the negative rather than the positive. And so keeping in front of that, whether it's on your brand or whether it's on an item that you're proposing for private label, is something that I would highly recommend, because that can slow you down, or that can be the difference between a yes or a no as well. I would also say things that are extremely authentic to your area or your region. If you think about Austria, what are you known for globally, whether it's a cliche or a stereotype, and whether you don't like it or not, I would say those are always areas that you know, private label looks to exploit a little bit, offering authentically Austrian type cheeses, for example. They'd have a whole section within their cheese wall for Austrian or Alpine cheeses. Peter, anything else to add?
Yeah, I'd like to give you a brand that I was one of their first distributors. It was a startup company. It was a protein bar, and of course, that's a really extensive category and a lot of competition. But they decided to strictly go with social media, went nuts with it, and they did a bang-up job. And after 4.5 years, they're now a $17 million company. So after really, well, they're millennials, so that really helped out. But for them, there's struggles, and a lot of just of new brands that are coming into the Canadian market. Their struggle is dealing with distributors, because just they think distributors are going to sell their product for them, but actually they're not. They're just shipping the product for them. So I want to make that very clear. And this platform right now in Canada, that's the way it is. Distributors have 4,000 to 5,000 different SKUs. They have so many different categories, and it's hard for them to focus on every single solitary product. I can't tell you of how many trade shows I've done with brands that I represent, and you know, they're working with major distributors, and you know, when I meet the team, they have no clue that they have this product in their that they're representing this product until I attend shows. And year after year, we do that and spend all this money. But that's just the way it is. Just want to put it out there. Thank you.
So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions based on what you just said. So my first thing that I would like to add to, Sabrina, you mentioned the regulatory requirements. So we have in our webinar series 2 webinars dedicated to regulatory requirements. I also see some questions in regards to packaging for the beverage sector and also for frozen meat. I will take those questions. If that is okay for everybody, I will take them to the next webinar, so we can actually have the experts talking about that. And if anything is not answered, we will get back to you with more details. You have also said something about the market research, get to know your market. So that is now something I have to add. I'm working for the Austrian Trade Commission in Toronto. I also see my colleague from the New York office here today. So you basically have, your office around the world where you can ask us for your support, for supporting you. Reach out. If we do not have the answer, we will help you to put you in touch with whoever may know what we do not know. But usually when it comes to, getting started in the market, it's a good start to reach out to our offices around the world. You also said something before, Karine, you mentioned the distributor, the broker, and the sales agent. Is there anything I think everybody may be familiar who is here today. Is there anything that is specifically for Canada that you would like to add to describe the roles here?
Like Peter mentioned, right, there are distributors, you often, even though they come out and tell you that they have 15, 20 sales teams on the ground, they are an assistance, but they are actually logistic providers. So if you get that mindset that if you go to a big distributor, or even an independent distributor, and they can get your products into the retailers, well, they're doing their job. Their sales reps as an additional service, which helps build. Your sales agent, yourself, your broker are the ones that are going to push the volumes. They're the ones who are going to build those relationships on the ground. They're the ones who are going to network with the people, participate in, the engagement of the brand and, establish your brand value. So important to identify these roles and not get confused or then later on get disappointed that this was not serviced correctly. And that's the fundamental difference between, the sectors, the retailers, the distributors, the brokers. We're all part of a team. We are an extension of your brand, but each of us have very defined roles. And as long as we're doing our roles, everyone else does theirs, the brand succeeds.
And just to build on that, more often than not, if you find a sales broker that, you have a good relationship with, or that, it's important that there's a good fit with that broker as well, they can do the job of helping you with the distribution piece, as because they've worked with many in the past. So if that's your kind of your gap is, how do I find a distributor? Brokers are well equipped to also give you suggestions or talk you through your specific needs and recommend the right ones.
Yeah, and to build on, Rena, sorry, to build on that, there are 50 plus distributors in Canada, a lot more brokers, and not every distributor is a good fit, just like not every broker is a good fit for your product. So research again, right? Where you get your products in, the regionality of it, the big box distributors are the ones that make payments on time. There are so many factors to decide which is a correct distributor. So again, that's where the research comes in. Research the distributors as well and the markets they service. If that's the port of entry or it's the independent or the mass channels, make sure that the retailer gets serviced by the distributor, because if the distributor is not going to the retailer often enough, your product is out of stock on shelf.
So we have a question in the chat, and I don't know if it has been answered. So how can you find a suitable distributor? On what channels? Like, is it a trade show like Cial? Is it online? Is it so what is your recommendation, if you have any?
You can talk to friends, colleagues, associations like yourself, and then talk to sales reps, brokers, because like Sabrina mentioned, we know the distributors that are currently in the market and also identify products that fit the distributor well. So whether it's a friendly conversation, my company, I'm always open to having, open conversations. If you can't afford a broker or you don't have the margins for that, that's fine. But build relationships. Going to trade shows is a great opportunity to kind of see the landscape and network with the different brokers, distributors, retailers, and then learn and gauge interest from there.
For the big guys, trade shows are where I would recommend you start, because they are also category specific. So if you're in the alcohol business or wine business and you're going to wine specific trade shows, you've got distributors whose experience is in distributing wine and they understand the regulations. Same with cheese, same with meat. And then the natural health segment has their own group of distributors. So if you're attending those kind of category specific trade shows that are specific to your products and area of experience, that's where you'll find your the big distributors to help start your search. But I agree, I would then start to talk to others in your industry who they're using. It's always really about word of mouth. There's no massive directory, I would say.
Yeah, we do have always companies from Austria reaching out to our office and ask for recommendations, and it always depends the products, right? Not every product fits the distributors. You already have a good relationship for other products, right? So Peter, I would like to now switch the question and do it the other way around. What are you looking for when you decide to represent or when you select and represent an international brand to represent here in Canada? So the question was a little bit, so what key factors do you consider when you select or to represent the country, another company here in Canada? So now it's out.
Yeah. Well, I look at marketing trends, and then of course I always refer to my customers' request, but I also look at the competitive landscape, valuation of existing competitors, brand identity, ensuring there's value, mission, image for Canadian sensibility, and then like the health and safety standards, what the product brings. The one problem that I usually have is minimums, because a lot of manufacturers require certain minimums, and of course it's hard sometimes for Canada because of the volume. So I have to really work closely with that, because at the end of the day, I have to fill a container to bring it in. Like to start off, you bring 1 or 2 pallets, that's good. We can try that. But it really makes sense to do a full container. So I have to bring on board at least 3 or 4 or 5 customers to make sure that volume is continuing on. So that's what I basically look for. And then there's so many other factors to consider in respects to how does it go out, do they have everything in place, like marketing spend, et cetera, right?
Thank you for that. We talked about, Austria being a brand that is actually a well-perceived brand in Canada during our first webinar, and as you all somehow touched on that too. Could you 3 also share examples of successful brand differentiation strategies implemented and how Austrian manufacturers can apply similar approaches to stand out in the Canadian market? So it's not only on the Austria level, but also on the more individual level.
All right. So if I may, brand building is an ongoing thing. Marketing is being consistent and doing that consistently over and over again. Also building on successes that you've had in your own country. So if a certain marketing campaign has been super successful, then think about it from a Canadian lens and see if that can be incorporated. In today's day and age and generation, social media marketing is huge. And, TikTok videos, Instagram, colorful pictures, just engagement is very, very important. Making sure that you are connecting with your target demographic is super important to make sure that they connect with your brand. And that can be accomplished through social media now, because that's the biggest form of advertising and marketing for us right now. If your product is addressing an older clientele like wine or cheese, how are you getting that across to them? Trade shows are very important, again, to engage. Personally, we are all looking for connections. If you can connect with your consumers on a micro level, not a macro level, your brand has a lot more impact. That's just my little bit. Sabrina,
Yeah.
anything you can?
Yeah, I would say for private label, marketing is typically run by the retailer. So that's, from a costing perspective, and we'll go there in a little bit, but factor in the fact that the ask is never for you to spend any money on marketing when it's private label. I'm pretty sure that sounds intuitive, but just to make sure everyone gets that. But for private label, I would say making sure that you're still engaging the category teams once your product is launched to run those promotions, because I think what the biggest misconception is that because the retailer runs the marketing on the product because it's their brand, that they will just do it, is not true. They are heavily reliant on the manufacturer of that private label product to be tracking sales, to be monitoring year over year growth, and to make recommendations on number of promo weeks a year, or we did this last year, maybe are we going to be repeating it this year, because that'll all impact your production and your volume. And then just on if it's a brand that's at Loblaw, I would just think about your pricing strategy as it relates to your promo strategy. So are you gapped at the the lowest, the medium, or the high? We call it good, better, best. And are you putting forward a product that's cheap and cheerful? And that's okay. There's a need for it. Are you putting forward a product that's premium, and you just want to live your brand respectively as it relates to that strategy? So, if you're a premium product, going on sale a lot or markdowns probably doesn't do your brand justice. And so you just want to think about that as you consider the volumes that you're going to put into the store, or how you're planning to launch it as you build your plan with your category manager or your sales representative to make sure that you're not setting it up for failure within the consumer's mindset. Peter?
Yeah, if I can just sum it up, I'm working with a reputable chocolate brand a Canadian brand, and I approached them to do private label, but they were a little bit apprehensive for the fact they thought they were going to lose their market share because they really were successful. But after countless meetings, they finally decided to get in and do a private label. And I can't tell you how successful it is, simply for the fact that particular, I have two accounts, are really promoting their private label and giving it countless promotion throughout the store and multiple facings through their stores, and it just worked out really well. And now they're exceptionally happy. They go and take pictures of their branded product and their private label, and they've got a lot of facing now in that particular category. So it worked out really well for them. So that's just one segment that I can share with you. Thanks.
It actually brings me to my next question. So what are the pros and cons of introducing your own brand versus, your own branded products versus doing private labeling? So maybe Sabrina and Peter, if you can give some examples that may be helpful for our audience.
Absolutely. So I think the obvious, when you own your own brand, it's your brand. You set the pricing, you set your profit, you own it. You have the flexibility to, discount it. You're building something that you can take, beyond the Canadian marketplace or your own marketplace. I would say the con from a big box retailer point of view, right? So just remember, this is from the Loblaw, Walmarts of the world. It can be very expensive. So there are a number of fees associated with putting your brand into a big box, or to Loblaw specifically. Things like listing fees. You have to pay for your promotions and your marketing. You're really at the mercy of the category manager to do what you're asking them to do in order to make sure that you're getting trial and product into customers' hands as much as you possibly can. You're also not guaranteed the number of stores. So I've seen this a few times where Loblaws will list something, but they'll put it in 60% of their stores because they're all different footprints. So, some of the smaller planograms don't have the space to add that. So it's just, something to consider. I would say, and maybe we can talk about this later, it's not always about number of stores either, because sometimes the size of the stores run the volume versus the smaller ones. And anyways, we can talk about that maybe in another question. I would say for private label, the pros are you get into every store pretty much, right? So Loblaws will put your President's Choice and No Name into every store. It's their brand. That's what they do. That'll trump any brand on shelf. There are no listing fees associated with it. The ask is that you have a best cost, so it's an all-in cost. They're not going to ask you to pay for any marketing fees or anything like that. So that should all be factored into your pricing. But the con with private label is, again, you're at the mercy of the retailer a little bit again, right? So if they decide that they want to not repeat a promotion this year because they have a different innovation, there's not a lot you can do to change their mind, other than, give them new innovation to consider to help repeat that volume. And it's, from a production run point of view, it can be challenging to manage. So unlike your brand, you can do a production run and sell to multiple people to run through what you've got. With its private label, you're really heavily dependent on the forecast coming from the retailer, which aren't always accurate. And then you're constantly chasing them, especially if there's a shelf life commitment, to make sure that they, buy what you've produced. And most of them have clauses that say, we don't want you to produce more than 3 months worth of inventory. So the efficiencies, you kind of lose them out a little bit. I don't know, Peter, if you have anything to add from private label in the indie world, how different it is, pros and cons.
Yeah, there's so many pros and cons, but like branded product does offer prestige, innovation, and customer loyalty, while private label provides a cost saving, as you mentioned. Right now I'm like working with olive oil is like going crazy with prices. So now a lot of my customers wants to do a private label, so the fact that oil category is just going crazy. So we worked it out, and it worked out better to do a private label. It's more that way. It's more competitive. You don't have all the layers in the distribution end of it. So that worked out well. So it's a hit and miss for everything in regards to whether you do private label or you do a branded. There's no question.
Awesome. So if I may add on to that, private label is not only just for the big box, big gross mass. The independents have also started gravitating towards private label just to build that brand loyalty with the consumers and their select consumers. However, the con of that is the independent private label markets do not give you the volumes that you need. So if you are creating packaging and you need to buy 100,000 units of a bag just to get that pricing, because again, they're going to muscle you down for that price, that lower price, they may not necessarily give you the volume to run through that entire production. So that's the con, but the pro is that it's easier to do business with, faster decision making. You can just go in, show them a product. If you've got a great price, and you want to test out that product also before you put your own name and your own brand behind it, that can be an opportunity as well.
And it's always easier
that's a
to
good
have
point.
goods already in the market somehow, right? That you can prove you have done business with Canada and Canadians.
Exactly.
Sorry, Sabrina, you were about to say something?
I was just going to say, yeah, not unlike Europe, the lead times on private label are typically 12 to 18 months before you see a return on that effort.
Mm-hmm. So we are already speaking about money, and we also have a question in our chat in regards to the financial aspect of things. One of the questions that we have actually discussed beforehand is, like, in such a dynamic retail landscape, the pricing. Can you share your insights and experience? How can Austrian manufacturers really effectively strategize and adjust their pricing strategies to remain competitive? There is the quality, there is the brand, there is the product, and then there is the financial aspect of how much everything costs. So I don't know who would like to take that question.
I could start off on that. My own, and it's going to be short. Know your pricing, know your margins, know your COGS, as we call it, cost of goods. When you know the cost of goods well, then from that, you build your margins and allocate margins for every step of the way, whether it's your distributor, distributors have an average margin that they work in, always range on the higher side so that you're not hit with unrealistic suggested retail. Build margins for your brokers, build margins for your retailers. Everyone has an average norm they work with. Know those norms and build your pricing. Margin allocation is super important, and then definitely build margins for promotions, because like we said, getting it on shelf is one thing, getting it off shelf is one thing. And if you do not advertise and promote your products, even if it's 50 cents off, it's putting that little red tag in front of your product on shelf. That'll get my attention and say, okay, it's a new product, I don't know, but it's on sale, so I'll try it and get that. So put your promotional planning in place right from the start before you launch, so that you know that you've built a program that will hopefully be successful to get products off shelf.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would say the advice I give new brands is factor about 20% of your annual estimate or forecast and 20% cost into promotion. That's the general rule of thumb. You know, you might only get 10% executed from the category team, but if you've budgeted for it, at least you've got it. And I would say name of the game for a new listing is trial. Get your product in as many hands as possible, however you possibly can. And promotion is a really, really great way to do that. I would also recommend leveraging the banner sites online. So like nofrills.ca, loblaw.ca, pc.ca. They're always .ca, not .com, because they're Canadian. But you will be able to get the retails, the current retails. So you can start to understand, you know, the competitive landscape, and if you would be priced right based on where you think you would want to go out to the marketplace, or where on average people are buying, you know, frozen burgers. What's the average price in Canada? I was going to say something else and I forgot. Yeah, that's all I would recommend is checking that out. Oh, I would avoid, that's what I was going to say. Online sites like Instacart, that pricing's not exactly up to date. It is margined up because they have to make money. So they're a little inflated. But if you go directly to these banner sites, even Healthy Planet, some of the independents have their own banner sites, you'll be able to see current pricing there too.
Thank you. Peter, anything to add from your point of view?
Definitely. I mean, yeah, well, as we know right now, the euro is $1.5, so that went up again. And then we're up against new transport costs, simply because of the Middle East. And they're upcharging $2,000 to $3,000. You know, we thought after COVID we wouldn't have any more surcharges and crazy transport costs, but that's not the case. So that's happening now. And, you know, distributors take anywhere between 25 to 35% gross margin, right, Pareen? Right?
They do.
And then, you know, private label, you know, they want to be 20% lower than their competitive brands, and they want a 40 margin on top of that, right? So it's tough. Like one example right now is I work with an Italian manufacturer of cereal, and we decided to bring it into bulk into Canada and pre-package it in Canada, not in Italy, simply for the fact to manage the MOQs, right? And it worked out well. So you have to work closely with your suppliers and figure out different scenarios to make this happen and to work out, to be competitive in the Canadian market. Thanks.
Thank you. So one of the questions in the chat was, how much are the average fees for being listed in the big wholesale chains? I don't know if that answer is easy to give.
Yeah, listen,
or it all depends
on the high side. I can scare you a little bit. On the high side, it's about 160,000. And that's, you know, mainline
Per
gross
SKU.
Per SKU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
The average, I would say, is, you know, the rule of thumb, depending on the department, is $100 a store per SKU is kind of the rule of thumb. So if you're looking into natural value only at Loblaw, you know, you're not every store has it. So that's why their listing fees are around 15,000 a SKU per, or 30,000 a SKU per division. You know, if that's the kind of stuff that scares you a little bit, then that's where I would recommend some of the independents, or even somebody like a Fortino's, whose listing fees are $1,500 a SKU. And they really work with retailers to, you know, or not retailers, manufacturers to get product in. They would rather you spend that money on promotion rather than listing fees. And it's a great way to then build your business case for, if it's doing well, then you can get it into the main line. But those listing fees can be, yeah, they're not great at Loblaw specifically. Yeah, I can't say anything else.
Thank you. Anything to add, Peter? And then if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to put into the chat. We took them along the way and hopefully answered some of them. Do you have anything to add to that, Peter, from your experience?
No, I'm good. No.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Are there any more questions to our panelists, to our speakers today? If not, I would like to actually thank you again, Pareen, Sabrina, and Peter, for being here today. I hope that you went to Marketplace as well, Sabrina. Is that right?
Yeah.
Last time? Okay,
yeah.
So Peter, I think you already went 3 or 4 times, if I am not mistaken. You work with a lot of Austrian companies.
3.
Sabrina,
I already deal with a lot of.
Okay, perfect. So you're very familiar with Austrian and the quality and working with the Austrian companies. Sabrina, it was your first time last October. That's perfect. So I already know the date for the next Marketplace in Austria. It's October 16th. And I think you can already put your information that you're interested in. And I think the invitation goes out after Easter. So I hope we may have you back in Austria in the fall. I think it's a great way of getting in touch and having conversations, tasting the products. And if I remember well, we had about, I think, 15 or 13 Canadians in Vienna for the Marktplatz last fall. So I hope that there is a good and big delegation again. So the panel discussion was incorporated. We had the panel discussion. We had a brief Q&A. We have 2 more webinars for now to go. I'm switching to German now. Also das nächste Webinar wird kommenden Montag stattfinden. Also nicht am Dienstag wie die ersten beiden, sondern am 11. März. Regulatorien Part 1. Da wird es um Etikettierung, Verpackung, CETA, Zoll im Detail, eben Einfuhrbestimmungen gehen. Wir haben einige wirklich gute Sprecher wieder an Bord. Am 26. März dann wiederum wird es um diverse Lizenzen und Mustersendungen gehen. Also wie gesagt, kommenden Montag können wir 2 Vertreter von Source Neutral Circle begrüßen, die diesen ganzen Regulatorien-Part mit Etikettierung und Verpackung abdecken. Und Christian Sivière, manche von Ihnen kennen ihn, ist ein Zollexperte und der Präsident von Solimpex, der sich bereit erklärt hat, im Detail noch über CETA und Zoll zu sprechen. Und dann auch noch ein Ausblick auf das Webinar am 26. Wiederum 2 Mitarbeiter von Source Nutraceutical und dann haben wir auch einen Customs Broker dabei, denn was wir hier bei uns im Büro wissen, Mustersendungen sind immer wieder ein Thema und Robert Coey wird darüber im Detail auch nochmal sprechen und Tipps diesbezüglich geben. Bleibt mir nur noch zu sagen, für all jene, die am kanadischen Markt aktiv sind, danke, dass Sie heute dabei waren. Für all jene, für die der kanadische Markt neu ist, erkundigen Sie sich bitte auch nach Go International Förderungen. Das heutige Webinar ist auch von der Go International Initiative unterstützt. Es ist eine Initiative von der Wirtschaftskammer Österreich und vom Bundesministerium für Arbeit und Wirtschaft. Und es gibt da einiges an Förderungen, die Ihnen dann bei Ihren ersten Schritten in Kanada hoffentlich helfen werden. Sollten Sie Fragen haben, wie erwähnt, wie finde ich jetzt einen Distributor, können Sie mich bezüglich dieser Produkte vernetzen vor Ort, auch Lebensmittelmessen und diverse andere Sachen. Bitte einfach unserem Team schreiben. Wir sind gerne für Sie da und wir freuen uns schon, Sie nächste Woche beim nächsten Webinar begrüßen zu dürfen. Einen schönen Abend. Thank you very much again to our speakers in and across Canada, and we'll see you next time with the regular tourists. Thank you.
Thank you.